Okay, thank you all again for coming to this training. And Abhay and Linda, if you would like to get started, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're able to see the slide?
Yep. Yes, I can.
Yes? Okay, perfect. So I think Alia gave a background already on how sort of it transpired. So let me just jump into it. Keeping some of the IETF terminology, you will see the presentation is also structured that way. The two people who were asked to do this, one is me. I'm Abhay Roy. I'm co-chair for OSPF. The reason I was chosen was I have been doing management for a while in Cisco, and the idea was to share some of the experiences from the management life. Linda, on the other hand, is part of Ombud's team, and she has a lot of background from conflict side in her personal side. So the two of us will lead the conversation, but the idea is not this to be a pure presentation. We would love to have this be more interactive. Stop us anywhere. We will still have enough time in the open to discuss. The way we have structured is the problem statement is exactly that, which is given our background, we have been asked to sort of lead this conversation and discussion. IETF resources gets more specific into what resources we already have from the IETF perspective. And once we get into the use cases, it's more about talking about specific cases where you may have such situations where you have to deal with difficult conversations and so on. Then going to in the end with open discussion. Okay, so I'll let Linda lead some of the IETF resource part, and I'll try to cover the use cases part. Linda, you want to take it from here?
Absolutely. Thank you, Abhay. I appreciate it. Good day, everyone. I appreciate having the chance to talk about having those difficult conversations that no one necessarily wants to have. Part of this presentation, or the part that I'm going to present before Abhay steps back in, is from the working group chair's luncheon that we presented at IETF 96. And that particular presentation was on keeping working groups fair, culturally aware, inclusive, and productive. So a few of the following slides will come directly from that presentation. To start with, we talk about the resources that are available. The Ombuds team is here to support the community and create an environment in which we're successful together. So, and that includes everyone. So realize that the three members that you see on this slide, myself, Allison, and Pete, remain available to help in any way we can. And I appreciate Aaliyah reaching out with reference to this particular topic area. The resources that we have listed are obviously easily gotten by each of you. The working group guidelines and procedures we thought helped as you think about how to move forward on some of these conversations. Obviously, the guidelines for conduct are important as well. So the presentation that we talked about at IETF 96 went to culture awareness, and culture is the behaviors and the beliefs characteristic of a particular social, ethnic, gender, age, or other group. And so we all know that I think we can go to the next slide. Okay. So we all know that we have unconscious biases. Maybe some of us have conscious biases. Hopefully we're working on those. But everyone makes cultural assumptions without even thinking about it. So part of having these difficult conversations is how do we overcome those biases to make sure that we are including everyone in the working group. we need to make sure that we recognize those barriers that might cause some people not to participate at the level you would hope to. And then we have to be flexible and receptive to accommodating those differences and not excluding them. Bay, the next one, please. So specifically, this slide, I think, is probably as important as the one before. How do you keep your working groups positive and productive? And taking these 5 points into consideration, including those unconscious bias, either by yourself or by a member of your working group, will help you have those difficult conversations, will allow the working groups to continue to be productive and successful. And positive. So in creating the inclusive and welcoming environment, think about all of those cultural pieces that we talked about. So it's the social, ethnic, gender, age, sexual orientation, political, military, country of origin, English not being a first language or maybe even a second language, age. All of these are part of the cultural identity that people bring with them to your working groups. And we need to think about how each of those individuals is going to respond to being inclusive, being, you know, certain cultures will not, if they feel someone is their manager in effect in this group, may not be as willing to be assertive about their why they're going for a certain point in the RFC. So keep in mind that having those difficult conversations includes thinking about those culture identities. One of the things that we forget about in communications is not just speaking to each other, but it's also about being good listeners. And I think that as working group chairs, you're probably all very aware that being a good listener does improve the inclusiveness and productivity of your group. We've already talked a little bit about the being aware of the participants' interactions, and that's watching to see if someone is sitting back after presenting something because of how it was received. So allow for that diversity of opinions and ideas. And then establishing the high standard. You know, one of the things that we talked about previously, and one of the reasons that we have an ombuds team, is that in the origins of the IETF, it was representative of the diverse community that was represented as part of the internet. And now we are looking to focus on how we could be that way again. So establishing that high standard for mutual respect is important. All voices should be heard, as is part of the culture. And then in not allowing those disruptive behaviors that cause people not to want to participate in a positive fashion. So to me, these are the important areas that will help keep your working group. Having those difficult conversations making sure that these behaviors are emulated may help you from having to have those difficult conversations. I think, Abe, you're on the next slide.
Yeah, so before we jump into the specific use cases, any questions so far? How is it going? Okay, that means it's going great. Let's get into specific use cases. And the way we have structured this section is, again, primarily focused from the chair's perspective, since it's a chair training. And we're trying to list all possible interactions the chair typically has, either upwards with ADs or ESG and so on, or with the peers, potentially because of overlapping work with other working groups, so dealing with other chairs in working groups. Within the working group itself, it could be with authors, participants, behaviors on mailing lists, and so on, and the support staff potentially, INA or RFC editors, and so on. So just a little bit of thoughts. Again, the idea is to get a discussion going. So I would really love to see in the next few slides, some people sort of share their issues, and then we can have some conversation around that also. Okay, the first one, it comes with a big wink. Talking with ADs is never a problem, right? So at least we are not talking in this forum unless somebody wants to bring it up. Talking with other working groups, which is more peers, I think one class of problem which at least I have noticed, and I have talked to a few of the chairs in last IETF also, is more about where does the work belong. Typically, where does a draft belong? Where should it get advanced? And things in that direction. And mostly it could be ambiguous because the document does cover multiple areas. One might be applicability, one might be some architectural related. And the suggestion is that chairs can generally, most of the time, discuss and agree where the primary work should be or the primary working group, and agree to keep other related working groups aware. By aware, we mean possibly cross-posting the documents, or in the working group sessions, make sure that they're presented in all the related working groups. When you're doing a last call, make sure that all the right working groups are involved. Most of the time, chairs can agree, but if they can't, ADs are there. That's part of their job to help and arbitrate and help us go in the direction that this is the primary working group and this is how you should go. As a note, generally the technology owning working group tends to own the work in that area, so eventually it needs to be blessed in that. Anything else anybody can think of cross working group? Okay, so moving on to within working group scenarios, this is, let's say, the author section. What kind of potential issues you may have with the authors, and some potential solutions, at least what we came up with. One is more in terms of tardiness of progressing the documents. So you see sometimes that people either abandon the document or they're extremely slow in moving the document forward. The document may be in your charter, you really want to get the work done, but it's stuck for one reason or the other. The steps you could follow obviously are starting to simply nudge the document authors that help move this forward. Here is the deadline. If you have tried reminding multiple times, the next solution could be to offer alternate editors. It could be chairs itself, or it could be other able members in the working group. And finally, you do have the powers to time out and enforce that decision that we have chosen these editors. Original authors are no longer willing or able, and still finish the work in the timeline which you intend to. The other class of problem potentially is contention on the content itself. And this typically happens if there is no clear consensus on which way the document is leading and what changes need to happen. So you may see some of the authors are saying, but I don't think there is enough consensus to change it. I think chairs can assess where the consensus really is, and based on that, they can guide the authors. Sometimes they may have to strongly guide the authors that I believe this is the consensus, please go ahead and make a change. And that should generally work. Any other class of issues with authors anybody has seen, would like to bring up? Okay, so I'll continue on to the working group itself, which is rest of the people, as well as participants of the working group. This list is probably a little longer than the other ones because it involves various things. But to start with, if you look at the mailing lists, or if you get into a real session at the working group and there is a meeting and what behaviors you see on a mic. And most of these behaviors typically may look disruptive, may look like somebody is stalling somebody else and so on. And one suggestion is chairs can actually try to have one-on-one discussion with the person who is believed to be disrupting the session, and try to understand what their perspective is. Because a lot of times it's not clearly understood what people are trying to say. There might be more of a communication barrier. Their point may not be well understood. And if that is the case, then that's very easy to eventually close or take it to a good closure, which is you can send a public mail, or you can privately get some of those resolutions. So that's the good outcome of a disruptive behavior. If the behavior was truly malicious or something else was going on, as Linda talked about, there is a lot more resources available, including Ombuds team, which can potentially help with some of these discussions. The other class is more about, it falls into the unconscious bias and some of those things, because some people you may have seen complaining privately that, hey, I'm noticing I'm saying these things, people are ignoring me. And this we have seen right in the presentation in the working groups or on the mailing list, where either the authors or some other people tend to ignore some other people. Again, we're not talking about specific examples. And it could be for a variety of reasons, right? What I have seen more common is English proficiency, as in the way they are trying to say things is probably not coming across as clearly. But it could be any one of the other ones. It could be race, gender, and various other forms of so-called unconscious bias. The suggestion there is if chairs can dig deeper to figure out what exactly is the issue, because a lot of times the issue is not very obvious, and chairs can actually help figure out what is going on. The whole discussion of inclusion and diversity is not something which comes naturally to everybody, right? And the goal here is that you want most of the people to participate actively and not get afraid and hide in their shell and not speak up, because then you will start to lose your work group members. So what you may need to do if you do have issues in your working group is have some messaging to be more inclusive, or at least take steps to become more inclusive in the working group, and possibly repeat such messaging every so often, because with time people tend to forget what they just heard a few months ago. And the last section was more about building consensus. And it should be very obvious that this is consensus or not, but guess what? Many times it's actually not very clear. You will find two factions of people going one way and the other faction going some other way, and mailing list discussions just keep going on and on and on. This actually suggestion came from somebody, one of the chairs in last IETF I talked to, and what he suggested is, at least he has had more success with this type, that take the authors and some subject matter experts offline, sort of conduct and facilitate offline discussion, and see if we can reach consensus in a smaller setting. So if the large group of people, let's say 20, 30 people are talking on the mailing list, they're just going everywhere, bring it down to a small set, let's say 5, 6 people who can potentially reach consensus and agree with each other. And if that is successful, then of course bring that result back to the working group and decide on the step forward. Any other things somebody can bring up here? I'm pretty much reaching the end of the prepared presentation. Okay, so going to some of the references, I think some of these books, earlier I even heard in the last chair lunch, I think. So I just listed some of the books I found which could be quite useful. I have not read all of them, but some of them I've read and they're pretty good. So I just left it in the deck so that people can refer to them. Okay, so with that we reach the discussion section.
So one comment or question that I'd like to chat about does come back to the driving consensus. And a piece of this is that frequently there's a bit of passive-aggressive, if you will, sort of stalling on having conversations that can actually drive consensus in the working group or clarify what that consensus is. And I'm interested in other folks' perspectives on that, and also suggestions for how to decide when it's time to sort of step in and really push. Because sometimes the delays are because people in the background, their day jobs and so on, are busy trying to figure out what they're doing or getting implementation happening or so on. But sometimes it's a disagreement in the technology or direction that is just being stalled on until there becomes time pressure to make a decision.
Right. So I think the most important point is IETF is not exactly a highly paid job. So people do tend to limit how much time they give. But I think the point you are getting to is there is sometimes true dissent in terms of which way the technology should proceed, right? And that should get enough of air because more ideas, the better technology we will end up having further down. And I think the role of the chairs is to sort of let all voices come to the table. That is extremely important. Then close voices early on, because you would probably not end up with the best technology you want to build. But at some point, you do have to sort of push towards the timeline that, hey guys, we said in 1 year we will be somewhere. Looks like we are still discussing problem statement. Probably not a good idea. We should try to push and close some of those things in a timely manner.
And I would add to that there's a fine line, Aaliyah, to your point of the passive-aggressive behaviors and when do you step in. There is a fine line between allowing conversation and allowing those conversations to be toxic. So I think it's certainly not one size fits all. As a working group chair, everyone has to be aware of watching, as Bay said, those mailing lists, the interactions, and we all know there's only 24 hours in a day, and we can't do anything more about that. So understanding and having realistic expectations. Thanks.
Yeah, agree. That's a big silence. That means they're all in agreement. It's a consensus.
We've stunned everyone into silence.
Well, I think one of the other pieces related to this, right, is, and it ties back to when one actually pushes for a decision or consensus that helps force conversations to happen. One of the things that I've seen is that people can be reluctant to have a disagreeable or even just a conversation where they disagree and are pointing that out strongly, that it can be tempting to simply wait until the next IETF or hope that somebody else will raise the particular point and so on. And so one of the challenges, I think, is figuring out how to encourage the objections to be raised and concerns to be raised in a way that is not unfortunate to the underlying relationship between the different participants.
Yeah, I mean, most of the volume of email spikes when one of these events happen, for example, working group adoption, working group last call, and suddenly you see a lot more engagement on the list, because I mean those are the times when we are trying to force a decision, or at least gauge the interest and force a decision. So you're absolutely right.
Right, and sometimes, at a meeting is a good time to force a conversation or focus, even if, by having the topic in the meeting, you can sometimes force more conversation on it. Okay, if there's no more questions or comments right now, then I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you both very much.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Alia.